There are many different approaches to the landscape design process, but the first step is probably to decide on the overall style that best suits the project. There are two major design styles. The first is formal. It's characterized by straight lines, geometric shapes, plants that are planted in rows and straight lines, sheared or shaped plants, and symmetrical balance. The second is informal design. It's characterized by curvilinear patterns, plants in irregularly shaped masses and groups that are slightly intertwined, natural plant shapes that are not sheared, and asymmetrical balance in the landscape. The style that you choose is important because it helps to create the atmosphere that the landscape is going to provide. So that's what you have to decide on first is what atmosphere, what feeling do you want to provide in that landscape? And then you want to match that landscape to the surroundings, to the buildings and structures, the neighborhood, all of those things should be considered. Informal landscapes invite you to explore, to wander, walk off the path, look at things up close, more so than formal designs do, where formal designs tend to direct you more from point to point, give you something to look at. It's very clear about where you should go and what you should be looking at. Formal landscapes work really well for formal houses, and that would be houses that are very symmetrical, um, or historical houses. So some of the big old houses that are on downtown Main Street that are 100 years old, even though they're asymmetrical, a formal landscape can still work with those because we tend to associate that time 100 years ago with a more formal way of life. Public buildings such as courthouses and museums also can lend themselves very well to a formal landscape, as can parks and gardens where the formal design is part of the artistry or the visual impact of the space. Formal landscapes do tend to be higher in maintenance and less forgiving. So when we have a sheared hedge like we have on the left side here, this little boxwood hedge, and it's sheared into a box shape, that takes maintenance. They don't naturally grow that way and they're going to need to be sheared that way probably several times a year. The same with columnar plants that are not naturally columnar in shape. We also usually have right angles in the bed lines, so mowing the lawn is a little bit harder because of those right angled turns. Those things all tend to make a formal landscape a little bit higher maintenance than an informal landscape would be. Formal landscapes can also be less forgiving. So if you're planting things like on the right here where you've got a row of plants all the same size, if one of those plants should die, you kind of lose that impact and effect that you were going for. And of course, plants do die. We have storms and weather-related things and diseases, and plants die for no known reason sometimes. But that will ruin that whole effect, and that's why the symmetrical balance, the symmetrical design of a formal landscape can be a little challenging in certain situations. Formal landscapes have straight lines. Paths are usually in straight lines with right angle turns, and down at the end of that path, down at the ends of the straight lines, will be something that you're meant to look at. In this case, it's a sculpture. It could be a vista. It could be an entryway or something else where you're supposed to go to it. So you can look around at the things on the side as you make that journey, but your eye is directed to the end of that line first. Unnatural patterns or shapes are going to equal formal elements. Okay, so we've got a kind of corkscrew evergreen in the middle of this picture here. That's obviously not growing that way naturally. It's been sheared into that shape, and that makes it a naturally formal element. We've also got a design or a pattern planted here in this garden. So it's a kind of a knot garden sort of a thing. It doesn't matter which plants are used to create that design, but the fact that that design, that kind of cross design in this case, is there makes it a formal element. We've also got formal elements in the back of this picture with the tall sheared hedges and the knot garden hedges that are in front of those hedges. We've got a couple of statues flanking that opening in the hedges there. Again, it's perfectly symmetrical. Those are all formal elements. Any kind of columnar or globe shaped or sheared plants are also formal elements. And it doesn't matter if they're sheared into columns or growing that way naturally. So on the left side, flanking that bench, we've got some columns that are obviously sheared that way. But on the right side, we've got very tall columnar evergreens, columnar arborvitae in the back here. They're growing that way naturally. That's their natural shape, but that shape is naturally a formal element. So it's hard to fit those into informal landscapes. Even though they grow that way naturally, they kind of don't look like it. So that makes them a formal element, that columnar shape. Again, you need to coordinate things with the buildings and structures that are around it. So this beautiful historic house, we think of it being built 100, 120 years ago, where when life seem to be more formal. And so putting a formal landscape around it can work. Here we've got sheared hedges, we can plant things in rows, all of that sort of a thing. Here's another case, a historic house. This picture looks a lot different than the last one because we've got a lot more flowers in it. We don't have the hedge thing going on in here, but this is still a very formal planting. And it's a formal planting because we've got plants in rows along the front yard here, along the front road. We've got a perfectly straight row of flowers here. We've got an alternating pattern where we've got a pink and then these ones that look kind of green, they actually have purple flowers on it, but it's alternating pink, purple, pink, purple, pink, purple. What's in front of the fence is very symmetrical. All that picket fence being a shape like that with the zigzag and being painted white and stuff, those are all formal elements that create this atmosphere. It's a beautiful atmosphere, but it is a much more formal atmosphere because the things are in straight rows and lines. And we've got a few shrubs in front of the porch that are globe shaped. Those are all formal elements. Informal designs can work on both formal and informal buildings. So it's very easy to take a formal symmetrical house or museum or a old historic house and put an informal landscape design on it. It's not so easy to do the opposite and to put a formal design on an informal building. That's very challenging and difficult to do. So you can put an informal design on both formal and informal buildings. With informal designs, you're a little more welcome to walk on the grass, walk down secondary paths, go look at things up closely, um, be um, wandering down there at a slower pace. You might take off your shoes and walk on the grass. All those kinds of things are a little more, you're a little more comfortable doing that in an informal design. Art or whimsy can be placed throughout, so there's more to explore along the way, and very often we have more variety of plants. Not always, but generally speaking, there might be more variety in plants. Here's the epitome of the informal atmosphere. So we've still got the mowed lawn, but we've got big bold curves creating the bed lines. We've got a fire pit and a hammock in there. It kind of invites you to go down there, lay around and relax. Rarely, if ever, are you going to find a hammock and a fire pit in a formal landscape. Informal does not mean natural. It does not mean native. Maybe you could say it's more naturalistic because of the way things are put together, but what we're really talking about again are big bold curves, kind of like how the stream would meander through the woods, um, and plants that are planted in groups and masses that are slightly intertwined, kind of irregularly shaped, that sort of a thing. Again, the curves create a more relaxed atmosphere. Again, you're going to coordinate with buildings and structures. So in this case, we've got a horse barn and a ranch house. Those buildings don't lend themselves towards a formal planting. It's not the atmosphere that would want to be created. So an informal landscape is much more appropriate. You can have paths that are made of the same surfaces in an informal landscape as in a formal landscape. So in this case, we've got a beautiful paver brick path here, but rather than being in a straight line with something at the end, they're following that bold curved concept. And we've got plants on the left side, so there's lots to look at as you meander down that path. And again, We might have some more artwork and whimsy spaced throughout. In the right side here, we've got the flying pig. Again, the flying pig would probably not fit really well into a formal landscape, but it fits just fine in an informal one. The plants are going to be more naturally shaped in those intertwined groups and masses. Those are formal elements. That's going to make it a little less maintenance. It's easier to sit on a riding lawnmower and mow along those curved bed lines than it is right-angled turns of a formal landscape. And there's not going to be the shearing and the pruning of the plants. And if one of the plants dies, like in that picture on the left, if one of the plants dies, the others are going to fill in a little bit more, or you can replace it with something, and it's going to be more forgiving than a formal landscape would be. Then we have the kind of in-betweens, and this is where it gets a little tricky. I like to call this one relaxed formal. It's basically where you take a formal landscape and you add some informal components to it to kind of tone it down and relax it down a little bit. This is a case where it's a historic house. They've got a old-fashioned gazebo there. Those are a formal landscape would work in this landscape just fine. And there are a lot of formal elements with the shaped evergreen in the middle, the sheared hedge on the left, but it's been toned down or relaxed a little bit by some informal elements, the curved line on the path, the curved bed line around the front of the bed here. Those are informal components, but we're blending the two together and it will work really well in here. Again, because the house can handle the formal landscape components, that works okay. Here's another case. This is a historic house that's actually now a museum. It's an octagon shaped house on a historic road in downtown Hudson, Wisconsin. The house can handle a formal landscape because of its era, because of its history, and it can also handle the informal components that you see here. So we've got some informal plantings right in front of the porch, and we've got the informal bed line, but we've got a very formal component here with the row, the uniform width of the row of hostas here, as well as the row of pink flowers in the middle. Those are formal elements, but they work because the house is a formal house. Relaxed formal is a challenge to do well, and here are some pictures where we're starting to get on the edge here. So we've got on the left a informal, relaxed landscape going down to the pond, but we've got a very formal element in a row of barberries around that path. So it's not offensive, but it's maybe getting to be a little bit out of place. In the middle picture, we've got a cute little blue, whimsical blue bench there. Everything on the left is more natural. What's behind the bench is more natural, but we've got a very formally shaped sheared hedge on the right, and that's maybe a little bit out of place there. And in the right, we've got a very informal structure to this landscape in that we've got a curved path and curved bed lines in the back, a wide open space with natural surroundings. The gazebo is a little bit more formal because it's kind of an old-fashioned thing. We can make that a little formal, but the planting along the path is very formal. It's a row. It's a regular pattern of a patch of the red flowers, then the ornamental grass, and another patch of the pink flowers and an ornamental grass. So we've got a blending of the two of them that maybe is borderline in this case because it's neither formal nor informal. So we're not sure which atmosphere is really being created there. Here's a case though where the house is also kind of relaxed formal. So the house is not symmetrical. It's informal in that way, but there are some formal touches to it. So putting a informal bed line and a formal plantings with some rows of plants in there in this case might work because the house is already blending the two styles, so the landscape can blend the two styles. Here, however, we're getting into conflicts. We've got a informal, cute little garden shed in the back with informal trellises on it, but the planting along this retaining wall is a very formal way to plant. We've got a straight row of these creeping evergreens going along the back, and in the front we've got one straight row of plants. That's a very formal element. So we've got a conflict here, and this landscape really doesn't create either style or either atmosphere for us. This is my favorite picture of a conflicted landscape. We've got an informal house with stained cedar siding and an informal split rail fence here, which is about as informal of a fence style as you can get. But we've got a very, very, very formal planting. We've got a straight row of globe arborvitae lining the driveway, which is an extremely formal element. We've got columnar plants along the back here that are planted in a regular alternating pattern with these gold shrubs and the other shrubs that are there. So a very formal way to plant. This landscape is not creating a formal atmosphere. It's not creating an informal atmosphere. It's really conflicted. The same with the picture in the top right. It's an informal house with a formal planting, a row of evergreens of very geometric shapes. And even though we see this a lot, that doesn't mean that it's good landscape design. This is a cute little picture of a conflicting style, but it's kind of cute and it works all right. We've got an informal atmosphere created by the wagon wheels and the fieldstone border, but when you look at the planting, it's a very perfectly symmetrical planting. If you draw a line down the middle, it's a mirror image on both sides. So you have to be careful about that. It's real easy to do this, but you have to make sure that you're planning it and be careful that you're not putting a formal element into an otherwise informal landscape that doesn't work very well. So the first step again in doing a landscape is to decide which style is going to be best, what's surrounding it, what's the use of the landscape going to be, and then decide if you should do formal or informal style. And then once you pick your style, stick with it. Be consistent.